Okay, so hello everyone. This is our podcast, The Boyhood Deeds of Cúchulainn. We are doing the story of today.
How Culainn got his name.
How Cúchulainn got his name, exactly, and a little bit around it as well. So, I suppose we'll dive straight in.
Let us go for it.
Exactly. So I'll read it out first. This is Lady Gregory's version. Shout out to Lady Gregory. Boy Deeds of Cúchulainn. It chanced one day when great fucking start.
Santa Claus!
Okay.
Why is Santa in this story?
It chanced one day when Setanta was about 7 years old that he heard some of the people of his mother's house talking about King Conchobar's court at Macha, and of the sons of kings and nobles that lived there, and that spent a great part of their time at games and at hurling. "Let me go and play with them there," he said to his mother. "It is too soon for you to do that," she said. "But wait till such a time as you are able to travel so far, until I can put you in charge of someone going to the court that will put you under Conchobar's protection." "It would be too long for me to wait for that," he said, "but I will go there by myself, and you will tell me the road." "It is too far for you," said Diachtra. Actually, that's one thing that I always want to just pause the story a little bit for and ask about the names. So, how do you think that's pronounced? This is Cuchulainn's mother we're talking about.
Yeah.
Or Setanta's mother at this point.
Yeah.
So it's Dechtire. Diachtra.
I imagine that's the name that Deirdre came from, no? Deirdre has the same ending there, so...
Diachtra.
Oh. No, probably just Dectra. Or Dectra.
But they're also from the north, so probably
Diachtra.
Diachtra?
Diachtra?
Yeah. Yes. right. So
Deirdre.
We'll go with that. Diachtra. "It is too far for you," said Diachtra, "for it is beyond Sliabh Fuad, Macha is." "Is it to the east or the west of Sliabh Fuad?" he asked. And when she answered him that, he set out there and then, and nothing with him but his hurling stick, his silver ball, and his little dart and spear. And to shorten the road for himself, he would give a blow to the ball and drive it from him, and that he would throw his hurling stick after it, and the dart after that again, and he would make a run and catch them all in his hand before one of them had reached the ground. So he went on until he came to the lawn at Macha, and there he saw 350s of king's sons hurling and learning feats of war. He went in among them, and when the ball came near him, he got in between his feet and drove it along in spite of them till he had sent it beyond the goal. There was a great surprise and anger on them when they had seen what he had done. And Fulaman, King Conchobar's son, that was chief among them, cried out to them to come together and to drive out this stranger and make an end of him. "For he has no right," he said, "to come into our game without asking leave, without putting his life under our protection. And you may be sure," he said, "that he is the son of some common fighting man, and it is not for him to come into our game at all." And with that they all made an attack on him, and began to throw their hurling sticks at him, and their balls and their darts, and he escaped them all, and then he rushed at them, and began to throw some of them to the ground. Fergus came out just then from the palace, and when he saw what a good defence the little lad was making, he brought him in to where Conchobar was playing chess, and told him all that had happened. "This is no gentle game you have been playing," he said. "It is on themselves the fault is," said the boy. "I came as a stranger, and I did not get a stranger's welcome." "You do not know then," said Conchobar, "that no one can play among the boy troop of Awen unless he gets their leave and their protection." "I did not know that, or I would have asked it of them," he said. "What is your name and your family?" said Conchobar. "My name is Setanta, son of Sualtam and of Diachtra," he said. When Conchobar knew that it was his sister's son, he gave him a great welcome, and bade the boy troop to let him go safe among them. "We will do that," they said. But when they went out to play, Setanta began to break through them, and to overthrow them, so that they could not stand against him. "What are you wanting of them now?" said Conchobar. "I swear by the gods my people swear by," said the boy. "I will not lighten my hand of them till they have come under my protection the same way I have come under theirs." Then they all agreed to give in to this, and Setanta stayed in the king's house at Macha, and all the chief men of Ulster had a hand in bringing him up. There was a great smith in Ulster of the name of Culainn, who made a feast that time for Conchobar and for his people. When Conchobar was setting out to the feast, he passed by the lawn where the boy troop were at their games, and he watched them a while, and he saw how the son of Diachtra winning the goal from them all. "The little lad will serve Ulster yet," said Conchobar, And call him to me now, he said, and let him come to me to the smith's feast. I cannot go with you now, said Setanta, when they had called to him, for these boys have not had enough of play yet. It would be too long for me to wait for you, said the king. But there is no need for you to wait, I will follow on the track of the chariot, said Setanta. So Concobar went on to the smith's house, and there was a welcome before him, and fresh rushes were laid down on the floor, and there was poems and songs and recitals of laws, and the feast was brought in, and they began to be merry. And then Culainn said to the king, Will there be anyone else from your people coming after you tonight? There will not, said Concobar, for he forgot that he told the little lad to follow him. But why do you ask me that, he said. I have a great fierce hound, said the smith, and when I take the chain off him, he lets no one come into the one district with himself, and he will obey no one but myself, and he has in him the strength of 100. Loose him out, said Concobar, until he keeps a watch on the place. So Culainn loosed him out, and the dog made a course round the whole district, and then he came back to the place where he was used to lie and to watch the house, and everyone was in dread of him. He was so fierce and so cruel and so savage. Now as to the boys at Owen, when they were done playing, everyone went to their father's house, or to whoever was in charge of them. But Setanta set out on the track of the chariots, shortening the way for himself as he used to do with his hurling stick and his ball. When he came to the lawn before the smith's house, the hound heard him coming, and began such a fierce yelling that he might have been heard throughout all Ulster. And he sprang at him, as if he had a mind not to stop and tear him up at all, but to swallow him at the one mouthful. The little lad had no weapon but his stick and his ball, and when he saw the hound coming at him, he struck the ball with such force that it went down the hound's throat and through his body, and he seized him by the hind legs and dashed him against a rock until there was no life left in him at all. When the men feasting within heard the outcry of the hound, Concobar started up and said, It is no good luck brought on this journey, for that is surely my sister's son that was coming in after me, and that he has got his death by the hound. And on that the men rushed out, not waiting to go through the door but over walls and barriers as they could. But Fergus was on the first to get to where the boy was, and he took him up and lifted him on his shoulder and brought him in safe and sound to Concobar, and there was a great joy on all of them. But Culainn the smith went out with them, and when he saw his great hound lying dead and broken, there was grief in his heart. And he came in, and he said to Setanta, There is no good welcome for you here. What have you against the little lad? Said Concobar. It was no good luck that brought him here, or that made me prepare this feast for yourself, king. From this day out, my hound being gone, my substance will be wasted, and my way of life will be gone astray. And little boy, he said, that was a good member of my family you took from me, for he was the protector of my goods and my flocks and my herds and all that I had. Do not be vexed on account of that, said the boy, and I myself will make up to you for what I have done. How will you do that? Said Concobar. This is how I will do it. If there is a whelp of the same breed to be had in Ireland, I will rear him and train him until he is as good as a hound as the one I killed. And until the time, Culainn he said, I myself will be your watchdog, to guard your goods and cattle and your house. You have made a fair offer, said Concobar. I could have given no better reward myself, said Catbad the Druid. And from this out, he said, your name will be Cúchulainn, the hound of Culainn. I am better pleased with my own name, Setanta, son of Sualtam, said the boy. Do not say that, said Catbad, for all the men in the whole world will some day have the name of Cúchulainn in their mouths. If that is so, I am content to keep it, said the boy, and this is how he came by the name of Cúchulainn. That's a good story, isn't it?
Yeah. Fine reading.
Yeah. It's exciting stuff. It was like watching a hurling match. So I felt a little bit like a commentator of a hurling match reading it. You know that?
Yeah.
That was good.
I felt like that listening to it.
Did you?
Yeah.
That's a good story.
I don't watch much hurling, but
well, a good hurling match is very much like a good story, isn't it? You know?
If you like hurling, I guess.
If you like hurling,
yeah.
So, any thoughts? Do you want to start us off there, James?
I mean, I don't know where you'd even start. I suppose at the beginning. So how does it start? Tim going to the place. Yeah, I don't have many thoughts on the beginning up to, because when I was reading it, I was focusing more on from the point where, say, he's at the hurling match and the king is going to Cullainn's. So I haven't actually thought a lot about the first part of it. So did you have any kind of like up to when he gets to the place? What was your kind of take on it?
So I wrote a few bullet points down. I suppose just kind of thing, not really anything major, but just things I noticed. So it's like one thing I noticed. This is a boy's story. This is like a story for young fellas.
Yeah.
This isn't a mythological story for like everyone of a people. I feel like this is just aimed at a particular demographic, you know, and that's just the one thing I noticed, because it's very much the story that a boy needs to hear and not a man needs to hear, or not a woman needs to hear. It's a story for a boy, and it's about a boy becoming a man and all the pitfalls that can happen you, and the sacrifices that you have to make if you go for glory, you know, as opposed to, you know.
There was a lot in that, because I was just thinking there, as you were reading, like this is a story of initiation, like
that's what it is. Yeah,
even I think in Aborigines, when the boy becomes a man, you know, they go through the whole initiation process, but when he comes back he's got a different name, and
yeah,
so like he's become Cuchulainn. He stopped being the boy Satanta and he's been initiated in some sense, and with that there comes the difference between a child and an adult is that an adult starts taking on responsibilities, and he's taken on responsibilities because he's now Culainn's hound. He's now responsible for guarding Cullainn's property and for helping him out. So yeah, it just like that really struck home for me there, how much it is a story of male initiation and that crossing that boundary, which I thought was really interesting. And yeah, another thing, just what you were saying there, the going for glory thing, that really made me think, because reading this and some of the other Cuchulainn stories, it strikes me that this is from a different time. You know what I mean? Like this is a warrior ethic. Like there's a scene in the Iliad where Achilles, his mother is like a Nereid, like a sea goddess, and she says to him, you know, if you go to Troy, you will be legendary. People will talk about you forever, but you will die young. And if you don't go to Troy, you will live a long life. And he's like, no brainer. And for Cuchulainn, that's the same thing. He's like, no, I was happy with my name. And they're like, yeah, but if you get to be called Cuchulainn, then that name will be in everyone's mouth. And he's like, well, no brainer.
Yeah.
You know, so it's that thing of it's a warrior culture where
he wants reputation, he wants notoriety, he wants to be credit, aggression, anger. Those are prized attributes that if you can like harness the wind in them, you know, like it'll take you far. You'll get notoriety and standing in your culture, like.
Yeah, and it's even just the prizing of glory over life, which I'm not sure. I think if you put the choice to a young Western, like I think if you put the choice to me now or when I was a kid, I'm not sure which I would take. I don't think.
It depends on how good it is, you know. I mean, like if you are kicking fucking ass till 50, right?
Yeah.
Or you live till 80 at a mediocre level, you know. It's just like that last 30 years from 50 to 80. In fairness, you know, you're probably going to be sluggish. You know, pains from bending over, fucking getting shit out of the drawers. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, if it's really good up until 50, I'd probably say, fuck it, go for it.
Yeah, but it's the question of, like... So, another story from ancient Greece of Alexander getting... He's the youngest ever, and still, like, historically, from the vantage point of now, what he accomplished by his age was just incomparable. And he got all the way to India, and... he gets to India and there's a man meditating naked on a rock, and they strike up a conversation and they both leave thinking the other one is mad, because Alexander's like, your man doesn't see anything admirable in what Alexander has done, because he puts the argument that, like, you know, if you get up to the mountaintop and you put a flag down, there's already 1,000 flags up there. So he's kind of... Because in the Indian tradition, it's the cycles of birth and rebirth. So he's doing the warrior thing of, like, breaking out of rebirths altogether. But from Alexander's perspective, it's the glory of living a life where, you know, you do something where everyone's talking about you. So Cuchulainn is like, oh, my name is on everyone's lips, that's amazing. Or Achilles is like, oh, I get all that glory. But you think, are you living your life for other people? Like it's the question of status. It's like, well, what do you want status for? Like, is that a good life? Is a good life other people thinking you're amazing? Or is it just living a good life? Because like in that sense, I would probably just take the long life and I'd probably make the best out of it for myself. I'd be like, sure, I mightn't have like the glory of everyone talking about me, but sure, what good is it everyone talking about you when you're dead? So yeah, I feel like there's a question there where I'd be like, I don't know that I want glory and to be dead. I think I'd rather be alive. I guess that's coming from a point of view of a much more secular atheistic society where I think, you know, if you go into the ground and you're dead, even if you get reborn, even if you go to heaven or hell, what use is it to have achieved massive glory? For
the
everyone
joy
to
in the
talk
moment, you know the Buddhists, and it's funny, you know, like it can go both ways. You can make the opposite argument. So it's like Buddhists and like the Hindus and everything. I suppose, you know, the cycle of reincarnation, it's kind of endless in a way. It's kind of infinite in a way. And when they talk about, you know, just like shut the fuck up and just listen to the now, you know, and just like all that there is right now, like, you know, and it's kind of like that glory is almost the peak of right now, isn't it? You know, it's you're sacrificing everything for right now. Maybe we don't understand glory. You know?
That's an interesting point.
Maybe there's I don't give a fuck about the future. I want to live so intensely.
Yeah.
I want to just fully embrace all of my passions that it destroys me.
This is so
that not admirable in the way?
This is so autobiographical. This is like, we've talked about this before in other contexts, where it's like, you're like, give me it all, give me it now. And I'm like, slow burn. I like to draw things out and enjoy them at a lower intensity over a longer period of time. Whereas I feel
like it's personal preference. Is that what you're saying?
Well, like I think ultimately it is personal preference, because that's why it's a choice. But no, I do find what you're saying interesting there, and I think when you put it that way, and if I don't think about you, like us historically having had this conversation, like it is appealing. You think that idea of living to the peak, but then, I mean, is one peak moment, or I don't know. Like, you end up.
It's all one peak moment, really, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Because your life is so short anyway. Like, whether it's 50 or whether it's 80, it's like in reality, isn't much of a difference.
Well, relative to,
you know? But like the gravity that your life can hold,
Culainn isn't living to
huge,
50.
You know?
He's living to like 17 or 20. Like Alexander.
Oh no, he's not.
Isn't he?
No, I think he lives. No, because I think he was a man when he died. Like he had a son and everything. From what's her name?
Oh, I remember from Aoife.
Yeah, Aoife over in Albion, Scotland.
But
so like that son was grown up when he came back and killed and he killed him.
But we'll
cover that in a different episode.
We'll set Cuchulainn aside, because that kind of like, if you're getting to 50 and you're getting all the glory, that seems like a good compromise.
Okay, maybe not 50.
But let's
take dying young. Like,
well, Alexander died at 32, 33.
Okay, yeah, so he's a man. He's in his full bloom, blossom manhood.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I suppose, early 30s maybe. That's probably when Cuchulainn died as well. He probably didn't get to lose 50.
Let's just say he was Alexander.
Yeah, no, but I'd say that's when he died. Like, because I know, like, even there's a statue of him somewhere in Dublin, isn't he? And he's like a beard, and he's a man, and he's armed, and because he accomplished a lot when he died. Before he died, like, you know, he wasn't.
Because they don't put it the same way. Like, so in that quotation, all they've said is you will just have to change your name. So it's more, I'm thinking more of like Achilles and Alexander, in the sense of that gambit of like, would you take, like, that a hero, it's just that he's willing to sacrifice that, you know what I mean? He's like, I like the name, but actually I much prefer the thing. But with Achilles, it becomes a much heavier scale. It's like, no, you'll die young or else you get the glory. And we'll say Achilles died in his 20s, presumably. Homer wasn't going around saying, and Achilles was 25. It was his 25th birthday. But like, you know, you'd assume he's in his 20s in his peak. So yeah, like I find it interesting that you'd choose the glory, and
I never said I would.
You made a strong argument for it, which suggested that you would.
Yeah, I never said I would. I was just exploring that point. You know, I was exploring how it could be like.
So which would you choose?
I'd probably be leaning in that direction.
So you did. So you would. It's just that you didn't.
I don't know. I'd have to wait and see.
Yeah. No, I did think that was an interesting point though.
This is definitely a hero's story versus. Oh, sorry. Like at the beginning, it's a hero story, and then later on in the rest of the Cúchulainn stories, it kind of goes to more of a warrior story, It's definitely like an encouragement story for young men to try and like raise the bar so high and to say like, look at this guy, you're probably descended from him, or like, you know, you're of the same people that this person is of, like you're of the same stock as Cúchulainn is from, and look what he did. You've no excuse for not aiming at the same thing. You know what I mean? Like when you have stories of such, like, because he's known for his feats. You know what I mean? Like even this story when he was a small child and he killed a savage dog that kept away fucking men at night.
Well, 100 men, they say.
100 dogs, I think he was the strength of. They said in the story, and like he was such a savage and cruel dog. And a little boy took him out. You know, it's like. Yeah, that's not only like a transformative thing like to happen. Like actually, that's one thing I found interesting. The dog himself, right, wasn't like a wolf. It wasn't like a wild animal, right? It was like he had a master. You know, like they said in the story, he'd only listen to me. You know, the Culainn, the smith. He was like one master, and that was it. And then Cúchulainn would only listen to the king. You know, so it was not only did he take the place, but he took the very position of the mind frame of the dog, only having one master, and he still was subordinate to the king, and that was the only way that I suppose he was able to, you know, live as he was.
You're saying Cúchulainn was only subordinate to the king?
Yeah.
But was he not subordinate to Culainn then as well?
Only in the time that he was being his hound.
So
that was because it was made as a promise.
Yeah.
It was his word.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
Because it's in a time of, they're not hunters anymore. Like they're warriors. They're concerned about killing men. They're not concerned about like providing for their families. This is a level up again from like the times of Finn McCool, where they were catching the amazing silver stag. Yeah. You know, like all those stories when they were like, you know, these endless stories of being out in the woods and having fucking great sport hunting. You know, this is a time of like warring factions, of probably the wilderness wasn't their main priority anymore. The main priority was maybe the population had risen as well, you know, where like there was a lot of people and there was a lot of competing and there was a lot of, because they seem a lot more hostile to each other in these stories in Cúchulainn's time than they did in any other time in the rest of the book. And so you'd imagine that with that hostility, you know, comes competition for lands, because there's a lot of them there at this point, you know.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Yeah, and the idea there, like, I think Cúchulainn is more of an archetypal character. Obviously, there's like the story either after this or before that he's beaten 100. Oh no, yeah. I don't know if it's in another version of this, but where he's beaten 150 lads at hurling. Oh yeah. Like they're all in goals, 150 of them, and he gets every single ball past them, and then he's in goals, and 150 of them are trying to score on him at the same time, and none of them can do it. So he's just like, and even the fact that when he goes, and they're like, nah, you're not one of us, and then the king says, no, take him under your protection, and then he's whelping 150 lads. It's like he's a hero. He's not human. Like in the same sense as Hercules, he embodies something that's greater than human. So it's not like,
and he's small as well. It's not like, you know, it's like he's a little fella. They constantly say it throughout the story. It's kind of like no one almost believes that he can do that shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So they're always an underdog.
Yeah.
Underdog.
Yeah.
Because he's a dog.
Yeah.
He's not a dog.
Well, he's a dog.
But yeah, just that thing of like he's more of, there's something non-human about him, or like the way they say in Greek mythology, often the heroes they're like demigods, and that's kind of the best way of thinking about Cúchulainn, because obviously he's human, but he's also not human. And if you look at his parentage, like his father's like Lula Fada, so
that came in a mayfly into his mother's drink.
Yeah.
And he swallowed her. But is that the father? Because she just kind of reappeared. You don't know. It's not clear whether it is or not.
Yeah.
But it probably is.
But I mean, that's a common, like even for the Táin Bó Cúailnge, those bulls they came from, they were rebirths of these gods that were chasing each other in changing forms. So that changing form thing and coming into the drink and becoming impregnated. I don't know. It's like a Celtic theme or a Gaelic theme. But yeah, and the other thing is that the king is more than, the king is a symbol, like the sun, like that thing of the thing at the center of the kingdom around which everything kind of orbits. He's the power center, and that thing of Cúchulainn, even as a fantastic hero, he's not the king. And if you look at like the Arthurian cycle of myths, there's not many myths about Arthur, and a lot of the myths about Finn in the Fenian cycle aren't actually about Finn. They're kind of like and Conchobar is similar as far as I know, and as far as I've read in the Cúchulainn cycle, that he's the figure, he's the king, but he's not the hero. It's like God versus Christ. It's like he's the center of gravity. He's like the sun, the organizing principle, and then you've got the actual things that are moving and rotating, the moving pieces. And Arthur is the king, and Conchobar is the king, and then it's the stories of the people around them, the heroic deeds. There is heroic deeds associated with them as well, but it's something they need to subject themselves to something higher. And Cúchulainn, it wouldn't be right for Cúchulainn to be king. It wouldn't be right for Finn MacCool. Actually, because even Finn MacCool isn't king. He's just the head of the Fenians. So even in the stories
like
about
the
him,
king's SAS or elite.
Yeah, he's like the head of the Secret Service.
Yeah.
Or else he's a scope. It depends on how the history actually was.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point, that like it's organizing around a higher principle. It's like even the hero, as noble as he is, subjects himself to a higher will. And that's, you brought up the distinction between a hero and a warrior. That the hero is kind of, so this is in, what's that book called again? King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. The difference between the warrior, like the hero has been the immature version of the warrior archetype. And the hero is kind of doing it, not for themselves, they're doing it for the glory. For the glory of their name in a way. Whereas the warrior is, they do their deeds in the name of something higher than them. They subject themselves. There's like a humility thing there, whereas the hero is like going out slaying dragons and their name is growing. Whereas the warrior is like, there's a higher principle. So I think with that distinction there, it's like that's the reason why Cúchulainn wouldn't be king, because he needs to be subject to something higher. That was a thought that I had when I was reading it. Like an archetypal subjugation.
The king is his subjective, as well, like as in he wants to please the king. Another actually thing I find interesting about this is that Setanta was his name, and Sultan or Shultan, however you pronounce it, was his father, but it wasn't really his father. It's kind of like his father, but it's not really his father, right?
But that's very like Jesus and Joseph. Yeah.
And so, also Finn MacCool's father was dead, and he was raised by women, and so there's kind of a common theme. And like, even if you look at like serious guys that like have reputation and status in society, like Mike Tyson, for instance, right? Like he didn't have a father either, and it's just like, is all of this stuff, is this need to be a hero and that need for glory, is this all like an overcompensation, needing to be subordinate to the king, needing to be liked by the king, like a father complex, like in a way, like even Jesus like had a father complex, didn't he? Maybe not, but that's a different story.
But no, because Jesus' father was on the scene. Well, Joseph was on the scene. Whereas Culainn, there's no real mention of his father.
So, there's a little bit. You know, like he's there, like he wasn't like a great fighting man, but he was a good fighting man. He was a nobleman, whatever like that. He was grand, like he wasn't anything special, like. Culainn was special, do you know? But where was I going with that? So like Mike Tyson and Culainn and Finn McCool and guys like that, like you wonder how much of that is a part of that. Like I was thinking, you know, this story might be like unintentionally a cultural stabilizing technology where if you have a lot of young men in society, they're the ones that can cause the problems if like real problems left alone, like if you have a lot of angry young men or undeveloped young men going around the place, they'll organise themselves into pretty chaotic forces, you know. And collectively they can be a fucking pain in the hole if you're like some person back then who doesn't want to get robbed and want all their cattle robbed, and then you've bands of aimless young men going around the countryside causing destruction. But like this gives them purpose, this gives them a way of finding a father, a way of finding a role model, a way of focusing that energy into gaining reputation. And if they prize reputation so much, and they also prize things like, you know, courtesy and things, even the way that the women flashed their breasts at him in the little bit of the story after, they flashed their breasts at him and he was like, oh, you know, so shameful about it, like and you know, even in Finn McCool's day, the poetry, the courtesy, that was a big thing, you know. And even he was saying about strangers welcome and that it was expected in a way, you know. There was an exception, but it was an expected thing. So like it could have been a way for guys back then to have something to fall into, you know, like a pathway that was carved, because it was probably common, you know, your father died in a fight or from infection or something like that. There was probably a lot of young fellas that needed role models, and in these stories were living story role models that they could model themselves off and become better and work towards something.
Yeah, I mean, you could explore that down deep and you get into a chicken or an egg situation. And like, why does a boy need a father? Why do boys without fathers end up with those problems? Why would that be a theme? Why would there be that untamed energy? And is that because something is missing in their psyche? You know what I mean? Like that the story... Yeah, this is what I mean. Is that like this is probably really confusing, but like, why would a boy without a father have problems? Other than his father being dead.
Because it's not even a boy without a father having problems. It's a boy without I think it's without clear direction more than anything else. Like, you know, it's like being in tall grass, and if there's a fella up above and you can see his head poking out the top of it, you know that's the way to go. You know? And if there's no one there, you could go anywhere. It's not that you know that you're becoming destructive or chaotic. It's that you just pick a direction. You know what I mean? You don't know whether it's bad or not. You know what I mean? It's just you go that direction. But if you have someone that's carving a path as well, it's kind of nice, because, you know, when someone walks in front of you, it's a little less hard to walk that way, rather than carving your own path. It's like more efficient. It's also kind of a thing where it's nice to be, to have that legacy, to have that lineage with something like, oh, my father showed me this, now I'm showing it to you. You know, and you then maybe show your son someday. And so you feel a connection to the land. Like even going around with my dad when I was a young fella, showing me the fishing spots that his dad showed him. You know, I'm like, how far back does that go? I don't know. You know, and maybe it just stops there. But it's nice to not know as well. You know, it's nice to have that lineage. It gives you a depth of spirit or something like that I can feel that a young man might, you know, be thirsty for. Like, you know,
so.
Because it's an example, isn't it? You know, it's an example of how to be as a man, especially a woman's initiation is more different because it kind of happens naturally to a woman with the period.
Distracted by the dog snoring. Very good.
That's a woman's initiation, you know, like it's a very physical thing. Like it's like once she reaches a point, the mother will, I don't know, maybe like the sisters or whatever, like probably other females maybe will tell her what the story is, and it's kind of like, oh, you're becoming a woman, and it's very obvious and it's like dramatic because it's blood and shit like that. You know, it's like, oh, you know, this is the start of it, I suppose. But for a man, it's a lot different. A man has to kind of decide himself.
Yeah, but do you
when
not
he's
think that
becoming
there
a
would be a cultural, like, just because the boy wouldn't have a... Like, are we specifically talking about boys without fathers, or are you talking about boys without direction?
Both. Because they're very much the same thing.
But
it could
like
be either or.
In a culture like that, I feel like they're still tribal, so even if you don't have a father, there's still all those role models. There's Culainn, there's Conchobar, like there's all these other warriors around to initiate you, and initiation generally wasn't done by your own father anyway, it was done by the other men of the society. So I feel like in that culture there would actually be less need for that than there is in our culture, where it's more atomic, where it's more outside of the nuclear family. You know, there mightn't be any culture, and now it's very common for there to be single parents. So like this is a much more common problem, and we don't have the myths to fill the gap. Whereas I feel like in that culture, like in that time, I don't know that it would be as necessary.
Yeah, I mean, like, when it goes on later, and I actually didn't, the rest of the story had a lot of stuff I had written down there as well. It's good to talk about, but there was the guy that was, what was his name, Jubles or something, I don't know what the fucking name.
Jubles.
The chariot driver. I know, it wasn't Jubles.
That's a great name,
I have to get it now.
Jubles.
It wasn't Jubles.
It's like the best Irish name that's never been...
Juber.
Juber.
Juber. How would you pronounce that?
That's not an Irish name, but yeah.
Joubert.
Joubert.
Joubert. In France.
Joubert.
He was bringing Cúchulainn around, and he was saying, like, he was like, oh, it's fine for you, you know, being a noble's nephew or whatever like that. But he was just like, I need to get back, you know, Conchobar keeps you under his knees or whatever, but I need to get back for fucking dinner because I have to fight with the messengers and the fucking errand boys and the fucking cleaners and jesters or whatever, you know. So obviously, like, you know, even though that he was like working for nobles, and he was probably one of the better looked after peasants in society back then, like he was still had to fight for his food, you know, for the scraps in the fucking castle or wherever they lived, you know, in Mecca. So yeah, I don't know if it's like something like a story like that to impregnate an idea of the survival of the fittest, or like take what you will, you know, because Cúchulainn, that was one thing, even when he was a young fella, he was telling that guy, he was a fully grown man, I think at the time, he was like, no, I'm fucking staying out here, you're coming with me, you know. He was telling Conchobar when he was choosing his chariots, he was just like, no, the other ones, nah, they're too shit. This is the one that does me, and it was Conchobar's chariot.
But even just in that story, Conchobar's like, come on, we go to this feast, and he's like, nah.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm busy.
Yeah, I'll be a while. Yeah, like he was his own boss.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And then there's the whole thing of... Yeah, so like the next point that I found really interesting was the fact that Conchobar forgot about him.
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
I don't know, I didn't know what to make of that, to be honest, but I found it interesting as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I think just tying in with that theme of like the king symbolising something. So it made me think of there's this chapter in Joseph Campbell's book The Hero with 1,000 Faces where he talks about atonement with the father, which is a story of male initiation, and he gives it two stories in it, and one of them is a Greek myth about a guy called Phaethon, and Phaethon is the son of the sun. He's the sun's son. So he goes, all the lads are slagging him, and he's like, so he goes to find his father, and he goes to the edge of the world, and he goes beyond the gates, and he goes to his father, and he says, nobody believes me. I don't know why he's Scottish. Nobody believes that I'm the son of the sun. Like, I want to prove to them that I am the son of the sun. And Phoebus is just like, whatever you wish, you can have it. And he's like, I want to ride your chariot for a day. And Phoebus is just like, nah, you don't want to do that. Like, you will die. There's no way you can handle it. Like, please let me out of that. Promise that I'll give you whatever you want. But Phaethon is like, no, I really want to do this. So he does it. He takes the chariots and loses control immediately. The horses just go wild. They go up and they piss off Scorpio, and their stuff is raining. And then the horses go down, and it's coming down over Africa. And that's how the Africans got their black skin, because in Greek mythology, that's how the Africans got their black skin, because Phaethon flew the chariot too close to Africa and scorched their skin.
I suppose, do you know what? It actually is, the sun is closer down.
It is to do with the sun, yeah.
Funny, isn't it?
And then Zeus just casts a thunderbolt and kills Phaethon, knocking him out of the chariot, and that's the end of the story, kind of thing. So the horses go beyond the thing. And in the other story, it's from Native American mythology, and it's a story of these twins who are the son of either the sun. Yeah, they're the sons of the sun as well. And they go to find their father, and their father is like a giant, and they go into the kitchen, and the wife is like, oh no, hiding there. And then he comes home, and the father hangs up his cloak of the stars or whatever, or the blue sky or whatever. And he's like, oh, I smell humans. And the wife's like, oh, I don't know what you're talking about. And then eventually he finds them, and she's like, well, you told me you had no other sons, you told me you were faithful. And he's like, these aren't my sons, I'll show you. And he tries to throw him off the wall, and then because of some spell that they got from a caterpillar earlier, they managed to not bounce off that wall. And then he does another thing to them, and they survive that, and he does another thing, but they survive that. And then eventually he's just like, fair enough, you're my sons. I acknowledge that you are my sons. And the difference in the stories is that in Phaethon's case, if the initiator doesn't test them, if there isn't a test, then it's dangerous and it's self-destructive. Like, the boy gets an ego inflation, and I am the sun, and I am driving the chariot of the sun, and ultimately leads to his demise. I imagine there's a connection there with the story of Icarus. And then, but in the case of the Navajo, the twins, they get tested. Before he acknowledges them as his sons, he tests them. And they need to prove themselves, and they get put through a lot of adversity, and they get put through a series of trials, and that's how they become, that's how they get the acknowledgement. That's how they get that thing of, okay, you're good enough. And you could think of this in general culture. If someone becomes like a child actor, they get too much too soon, and it's too easy for them, and then the general trajectory for child actors is not a good one. Like, they tend to burn up. They tend to, it's just not good for their psychological development because it got too easy. Whereas if you grow up and you have to graft, someone like, say, Ed Sheeran, who had just learned to songwrite and learned to go out there and perform, and he didn't just get famous overnight. It was like he worked hard for it, and then the rewards came. So it's like the fruit of rewards, fruit of effort, rather than just getting it fed to you. And so if you look at that in the story of Cuchulainn, you've got the king, what the king forgets, and that puts Cuchulainn in the face of this massive, how could he forget? It's like 2 minutes ago, and it's his nephew, and it's like, oh, we've got this brutal dog that can kill 100 men. Do you have anyone else coming? No. He forgets about it. But if you look at it in another way, as the king is that organizing principle, as the son, as that higher archetype.
Yeah.
He's like, as that initiator, then Cuchulainn is being put through this trial. So to become a man, to get his name, to cross that boundary from being Setanta to being Cuchulainn, he has to do this heroic deed. And the heroic deed is you need to face the dragon, you need to face the monster. And that's what he does. And smashes that Schlitter down his throat. So I think it's just that I see that as even just the king's forgetting is a kind of a test, in a sense. That's the thing to make Cuchulainn a man.
You wouldn't be forgetting about him after that?
I don't think so.
No.
Sorry. So I thought that was
It's funny that even we still say to this day, like, even if you're playing rugby or something like that, like, oh, he made a name for himself, or he got a name for himself, that fella, if they're a bit of a fucking a hooligan or something like that maybe. And it's not like a name you put in yourself. It's not a name you give yourself. It's like a name that you get from an external place that just sticks because because you're an image. And I suppose when you get a name from someone that represents an image, then you kind of live up to that image too. You live up to that expectation too. So you embody. It's just like this big. It's a lot easier to believe someone is a lot more than they are. Because at the end of the day, we're all people. I don't think he was probably. I don't think he was magic or anything like that. And he was a flesh and bone man like we are. But when that kind of vacuum is created above you, you expand to fill it. And in the same way, like if all the people around him heard about a reputation about how mental this young fella is, how willing he is to destroy himself in the pursuit of glory, he's won a lot of fights before he's even got there.
Yeah. And actually I think the context of, I think in another book, or maybe it's in this book even, but this whole story of his boyhood deeds is some of the lads from Ulster telling Maeve and Ailil that they've heard the story of this guy Culainn.
Yeah, I think it was Fergal who shot the Ailil, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it's like they're telling the other side of, because this is all in the Tombo Culainn, that like they're telling Queen Maeve, who's on the opposite side, so Connacht, like his stories are going ahead of him. And they're like, who is he? Like, what's the story? What's going on with him? So it made a name for himself, which is again like the thing of just that heroic thing. Like you've been tested. Like if you've made a name for yourself, you've gone through some level of testing. You've passed through the crucible of that thing, like the sun god testing his sons.
One thing I actually meant to bring up, actually only like kind of really twigged me there. Do you know the ball that he drives down the throat of the dog? Right now, I heard a couple of variations growing up. I remember it was a book that we read in school. I remember when we read that in school, like we were in the semi-final for the fucking national schools thing. I remember all the fucking lads in the class, when the teacher read us Culainn, we were all like, it was a young fellow who's hurling, it was a fucking warrior, it was fucking the best story ever, but the story was his father had given him this silver ball.
Oh, right.
It was his father had given it to him, right? Lou of the long hand is like, there's Lou Law Fada, but there's also Nuada of the silver hand, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think that was Lou's father, was it?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact connection.
Yeah, I think
no, Lou took the kingship from Nuada.
Alright. Anyway, let's say, forget about that, but let's say it was a ball that his father gave him. That's the story. That's what I remember growing up, and he had it with him all the time. It was like this silver ball. It wasn't like a normal ball. How often would it be a silver ball back then as well? Yeah. It was a ball of iron. I don't think he played as Hurley if he had a ball of iron, but like he did have a ball of iron to throw as a weapon, but that wasn't the ball. This was a hurling ball he had, and that was the ball that he drove down the throat of the dog that killed the dog. And it was like, kind of reminds me of like werewolves, like the silver bullet. It was like the silver ball that killed the dog. Now I don't really know what to make of that, but it's kind of worth thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, like I the symbolism of silver comes up a lot in Irish mythology, more than I've seen in any other mythology. Yeah. And it has made me think, like the children of Lear, they get the McQuaid Vogue, the saint, puts chains of silver on them, which is apparently quite a common thing. That recurs in other myths, that the silver chains, and then you've got Nuada with the silver hand, and so this, like, and silver is arget, which is money in modern Gaelic. If you translate like money, arget is just silver, like, so money is silver. So I'm just wondering whether like that was there before gold, or because obviously he didn't have a silver ball. Obviously this isn't a historical story where there's a lad running around with a silver ball, because anyone would be like, nabbing that. But it's like it's a mythical thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was a ball of silver, but it was definitely a silver coloured ball, I think.
It's not going to be like, no, it's a ball of silver, man. It's a myth. It's not like he's not got like
it says a silver ball. It didn't say a ball of silver, like. But yeah.
Yeah, but what do you think? He's just got like a ball that's painted silver?
I don't know. All I'm saying is I don't know. But you wouldn't hit a silver ball with a hurley, break your hurley.
Well, I mean, you don't like they didn't make silver hands for people back then either. Like this is mythology. Like this isn't history. This is like it's a silver ball. It's a dog that can hop over fences like giant ring forts and can kill 100 people. I mean, these are all like larger. Like he can beat 150 lads who are he can be a goalkeeper. And there's lads knocking 150 balls at them, and not one of them gets past them. This isn't historical. Like no one can do that.
You were just you wouldn't take it so literally, James. You were just exaggerating. It's not meant to be taken literally.
That's my point. It's not fucking literal. It's a story. It's a myth. So that is a silver ball. That is a ball of solid silver, like in that mythical sense.
Well, whether it is or it isn't, it's interesting that silver and gold are the two precious metals, right? And gold is very much like the sun, and silver is very much like the moon.
Yes.
And at this point, they let the dog out at night, so it's like a night dog that protects. He's only let out at night, you know. That's his job. Is gets let out at night to protect the place and to savage anyone who wants to come near the place, you know. And so, it was interesting to me. It was like he put the lights out in the night dog. You know what I mean? Like he, I don't know. He swallowed the sun or he swallowed the moon and died, and it fucking dashed him off the rocks. It said, you know. Yeah,
because there's definitely some deep symbolism around the spear, the hurley, and the ball. Because
the dart.
The dart.
Well, they say darts and spear.
Oh, he's got darts and a spear.
A dart and a spear, yeah.
What's a dart?
A dart is like a smaller spear that you throw. It's like a javelin.
Oh, because they used to have the two spears, right? Yeah. Because at the start of what you read there, on his way to Evan Macha, he's throwing he hits the slitter, he hits the silver slitter, and then he throws the hurley, and then he throws the spear, and then he catches them all before they hit the ground. And there was a version of this story that I read.
I remember trying that.
Really? With a spear?
No, with my hurley.
Oh, yeah. Did you manage it?
No. Didn't even get the ball.
I don't know if you can hit it hard enough. But there's a version of this story where where the dog is running towards him and he's still doing that. Like, this is what he does when he's on the way to somewhere. Like, so he hits the ball, he hits the slitter, and then he gets just the spear, and then the dog is coming to him, and that's when he rams it down. And there's actually, Lady Gregory seems to have combined two different versions of the story. Like, so in one of the stories, he just grabs the dog, one hand on the back and one hand on his Adam's apple kind of, and just smashes the dog off the wall. And then in another story, he just takes the slitter and bangs it down his throat. So there's like a combination of those two elements. So which, you know,
the two I've heard is that one, the ball hits him off the head like that and he dies dead, and then the other one is it goes down his throat and he dies from choking or whatever like that.
But the ball snap. I never heard the one of hitting him in the head.
No.
Like just that there. That's the one I would have known that the image I always had in my head of Culainn was hitting the slitter and then it going just right in the dog's mouth and just choking the dog out, or else in this sense it goes through him. The silver ball goes through the dog. It's an interesting one. I'm not sure what to make of that. And the dog chokes. Yeah, there's something there. And I don't know what it is. Can't twig it. Yeah. And then I thought Culainn was an interesting character.
The Smith.
Yeah. Because I was doing some research on something about Yahweh a few weeks or months ago, and there's this researcher that thinks that Yahweh was originally the metallurgical god, or like the smithy god of the Canaanites. That he was originally just like the god, kind of like is it God New? Do you know the smith of the two of the Dawn? Like it kind of like that kind of character, like the god of blacksmithing, of all smithing, and that over time he became the arch god, but that there was always something back in those times. If you were a smith, if you were a coppersmith or a blacksmith, there was something there was something a bit off about you. Like you were there was a suspicion that you were meddling with gods, and that could either be like in a devilish way or like you had supernatural powers because of what they were doing. So even in archaeology, you'll find that the smith is off from the rest of the village, is off from the rest of the tribe. Now that could just be because it's fire. You don't want to burn down your village.
Smelting. I mean, copper smelting releases cyanide.
It does.
Yeah.
Probably
something like when there was metals was first being discovered.
Yeah.
Like copper was one of the first metals to be refined, and when that was refining, even Uzi, the Iceman that they found in the Swiss Alps or the Italian Alps, wherever there was found, they can tell from his hair, from the analysis of his hair, that he was around copper smelting from the levels of
really?
Cyanide, or is it arsenic? I think it's cyanide or arsenic. Yeah. Arsenic in his hair from then,
Right, yeah.
So like you'd imagine that, like people superstitions arise around things like health, you know what I mean? Like it's bad luck to bring elder into the house and burn it in a fire because that releases cyanide as well. So are these things bad spirits, or they just
on some level do they pick up on it in an intuitive level?
Yeah, and be like, oh, that's bad for
But
you.
even just the whole process of the smith is like very alchemical. Like they're changing, they're breaking, they're heating up fire to like an incredible heat, and they're extracting metals. And even just the fact that they're the ones making the weapons, and they make the weapons, but they also make the things of peace. The tools of peace. So the harvest can't happen without them, but neither can the war. And so there's this almost a Promethean vibe to the smith. And so they get that. Just there was this guy was just talking about it with Yahweh, which I found really interesting. So the idea that Culainn, that it's Culainn, is the guy who he gets apprenticed to, the guy who he's protecting, and the guy whose house they're going to is the smith, which is that like quasi magical character.
If there was any father that was going to give his son a ball of silver, I'd say it would be a smith.
Yeah. He could replace that ball for him.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't, but he might. Well, it's no harm come to the ball anyway. But I thought that Gobnew was Culainn. It's an interesting character. Do I have anything else to say about that? No. Any other thoughts?
His name was kind of made on a promise of his. I thought that it was interesting that it was like his word that the name was made on. So it's kind of resting on it.
Yeah, again, I think that comes in under like the warrior ethic. Like you think of that kind of that master morality, that like they just having they had a different value system to us, and they prized different things. And so like
what's going to make our people survive more? There's different things now than it was back then.
Yeah, and like so you see this a lot with like the whole Diarmid story. Is Diarmid Grania is very much that, where Grania puts him under Gesh. Like she manipulates that thing of honour, that thing of you must honour your word. I put you under chains, I put you under obligation. And
how do you pronounce that? Gesh? Is that how you pronounce it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah? I always pronounced it Gisa. For some reason, I don't know.
No, I think the SE is an SH sound.
Yeah?
As far as I know, yeah.
Gesh.
Gesh. That's Gesh.
Close the Gesh behind you.
You're the Gesh, man.
Anything.
But like that thing of the importance of honor. That's such an important thing in a warrior society. Is like your name and your word are like very, very. You can kind of get away with with not honouring your word in modern society. It's kind of like it's not great. Like, be better if you honour it, but it's not.
I'll be there on Tuesday, and you don't turn up. It's no big deal. The fuck?
I text you.
Just the fly just.
Yeah, I see he was up in the light a second ago.
I was there flipping it off. He's a fellow bird, and then he's just a man there. Hello.
He's a messenger, man.
What are you telling me, buddy? What are you telling me? This is my pet fly now.
The cool wants to eat it. Oh, good.
Back to the thing a second ago. You know, there's a quote from McCool, what we were saying, or Culainn.
Him?
No, but we were saying about his life being shorter.
Yeah.
It is little I would care, said Culainn, if my life were to last one day and one night only, so long as my name and the story of what I had done would live after me. And so, like,
that's so Achilles. Like, there's such parallels with Achilles.
That's like Mars as well, isn't it? It's just like
that warrior.
Yeah, just ego, ferocity. You know, just like focus. It's like masculinity as well, isn't it? It's like multitasking. You know, women are way better at multitasking and almost prefer multitasking in my experience. And I myself am much more. I can't multitask even if I wanted to. I need to try and do things.
Apparently, no one can. But I do think there's something in that, like in terms of masculinity, that's especially around something like war. It's you wouldn't want the women of your tribe doing that because men are expendable. Like in a culture like this, where what he's talking about is going to war, rather than the equivalent in modern society might be setting up a business or something. Generally, people aren't going to war anymore. But like back then in that culture, you don't want your women being like, I don't mind if I live for a day. It's like, well, we prefer for you to live long enough to have children. You know what I mean? Whereas it's like men are kind of expendable. It only takes one man to pollinate a village.
It would be great to be that one man.
The slimy bastard who doesn't keep his word.
They all died, but it's only one that survived.
Why is your sword in their back? Oh, it was me. Was that good? So like I think that's definitely like the masculine thing of like warriors are kind of expendable. But also that single-mindedness.
Yeah.
But again, that's very much the Achilles thing of I don't mind if I die today. It's my name that matters. Like that honor is more important than anything else to them.
It's a little bit like when someone dies, you know, and to make it easier for people like to feel better about what has happened. They say, you know, this person hasn't really died. They live on in your heart, you know, and to some extent that's a little bit true. You know what I mean? Like their memory exists, true, and I suppose the person never really dies until the last person that remembers them dies. And you know, for a fella back then as well, like, you know, they had no science back then. You know, like even having children, like to them that could have, you know, children could have been just something that happened to women. You don't know. You know what I mean? Like there's uncertainty about it, and so the only way that you can really feel like you can live on eternally is through your name, yourself, like through your own singular being. You know
because I guess this is pre-Christian, so the idea of an eternal soul separate from the... Like, well, I imagine once that idea developed, things started to change.
Yeah. And same as like the Vikings. It was like all that shit stopped when Christianity came as well. Totally pacified everyone. You know? We'd fucking take over the whole fucking world if it wasn't for you Christians.
Irish people are the Vikings.
Huh?
Who was saying that?
No, but everyone was kind of Viking-y back then, you know.
This is that thing in spiral dynamics. This is red going to blue.
Yeah.
Blue comes along and says, you've got an eternal soul. You don't need to worry about your name living forever because you're going to live forever in heaven. So it's like you go, I don't need to do this glorious deed because I'm already going to live forever.
Yeah.
As long as I'm good.
Yeah. Before it's like you need to risk it so you could possibly gain eternal life. But now you're like, don't risk it or you'll lose your eternal life. You know? Yeah.
Which is like, that is definitely a move from a warrior ethic to, I don't even know what ethic that would be.
The Lamb of God as opposed to the Lion of God.
Yeah.
You know?
What about the lion in sheep's clothing?
Or like the dog. You know, he became the dog, like. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was a hound, a savage hound.
Yeah.
And then Christianity then made people like lambs.
Actually, that's one more
like
point.
The flock that follows the shepherd. You know?
The hound. Why is it a hound?
A hound is something that's under someone's control.
Yeah, but I just mean, What do you mean under someone's control?
Like, he had a master, and he would only listen to one person, but he would listen to one person. And so it wasn't a wild animal. It wasn't this uncontrollable beast that was out of hand, and that it wasn't a dragon, basically. It wasn't like this underwater fucking thing. Serpent or anything. It was a creature that people were familiar with. It was something that was used,
but still an animal.
Yeah,
because that's interesting. When like a dog shows up as a dream symbol, you would say, like, dogs, okay, they're closer to humans because they've been tamed. It's like animal instincts, but they're animal instincts that are somewhat conscious, or at least if they're not conscious, they're at least in a good relationship with consciousness, as pets are.
Yeah.
Because dogs are like, there's that closeness to humans, but it's still not like fully conscious, like verbally conscious. So like,
you can be with them.
Yeah, there's like there is a connection there, and there's a non-verbal, like they can be within. It's not like a wild wolf or a lion where you're like, or even a horse, a bull. Like, because bulls are domesticated, but you won't want to be in like.
You want to be around one.
No.
No, but they're not really domesticated for the purpose of like working with them.
Yeah.
It's like I want to
eat you.
Work them. I don't want to work with them exactly.
Yeah.
Unless it's like a horse, you could plough a field with a horse, something like that. You have to have a connection with a horse.
Yeah, horses.
Bulls.
Bulls used to be used for ploughing way more than horses. Bulls are.
Axing and all that kind of thing. Yeah.
But I guess all you're doing with that is strapping the plough. Yeah, because horses there's a connection with horses, but like, so horses and dogs would have that.
Like man's trusty steed type vibe.
But it's not conscious. It's not like when that shows, like, I'm just thinking when it shows up in a dream as a symbol, it's not something that is conscious. It's like it's in something instinctual because it's still animal, but it's an instinctual thing that you kind of have a relationship with, rather than something like an urge that just pops up and you can't control it. Like something that overpowers you, or something that you put in your shadow because you're like, I deny that. Which we could say could be something like a bull, which is like a wild, uncontrolled instinct that you don't necessarily have under control. And whereas a dog would be something that, like, okay, it's instinctual, but it's closer to me. I'm still just trying to figure that out because someone told me a dream, or I read a dream where someone, there was like dogs conflicting, and I was like trying to figure that out. So I was thinking with this, with Culainn, like, what's within that?
I actually wrote down here when Culainn when Setanta took the place of the dog and became Culainn, there was like a transformation process happened. Obviously, it's like he got his name, he had a role. The role was then falling into the role of a protector, like not just a protector over fucking nothing. It was a protector over like cattle and lands and substantial goods and people and everything like that in a hostile, dangerous place where people were out to get each other. But I found it interesting. Your man said that his substance would be wasted, now that a dog was gone. And I found it interesting actually that he said that the dog, it was a good member of my family who had taken away from me, because I think of country people like drowning puppies and kittens and farmers and stuff. And country people do that, like, it's different life in the country, like,
some country people, I doubt all country people are out there drowning dogs.
Go back a few years and it was all country people doing this shit, like,
I don't know.
Well, what they just like, okay, so let's say go back 100 years, right?
I feel like you should think about this statement a little, like, as if country people are just a different breed. As if you go back 100 years, country people were drowning dogs, but city people weren't. City people loved and doted on their dogs.
No, I'm just saying city people probably didn't have dogs and cats like country people did. Like country people needed dogs and cats. City people didn't. So I'm just kind of thinking that, lives were harder back then. I was surprised that someone living that far back ago would think of an animal as good as a member of his family. I thought that was kind of interesting.
because I think the fact that that we have dogs, the fact that dogs have been around us for so long, and
working dogs, like,
but there wasn't all the other types of dogs that aren't working dogs didn't just show up in the last couple of 100 years.
What they did, yeah. Man, most dog breeds are just really new, like. They didn't exist up until the last few years.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when you said the last few years, like the last.
Sure, Chihuahuas were originally.
I know Chihuahuas, yeah, but
like even other types of lap dogs were to keep you or like aristocrats warm. It was like a living hot water bottle. There was
yeah, but
dogs,
I feel like that's not like a working
shepherd,
dog. I feel like that's
yeah. They all
it's
retrievers, like they all have functions. Greyhounds catching rabbits, and you know there wasn't a dog that didn't have a purpose, and anything that came from then, like pugs. What the fuck? They didn't exist that long ago.
well, I can't really
You know,
believe,
where did they come from? You know what I mean?
yeah.
But yeah, so he took the place of the hound, and I found it interesting that the animal mind versus the civilized mind. So Cúchulainn has kind of this theme throughout his thing that he gets like these frenzies, these battle frenzies.
Yeah, I've heard about
like
it.
the dog was so savage, so cruel, and so crazy, and like Cúchulainn also had that, but Cúchulainn also had quite a civilized side of himself as well. Like he was a nobleman at the end of the day, you know, and he was like the king's nephew, and he had, you know, I mean, like he dressed nice, and he had manners, and he had courtesy, and I'm sure he knew poetry and songs and everything like that. But he switched between this animal and this man, and I found it interesting that at that very pivotal point where he was going from a boy and becoming a man. To become the man, he had to kill the monster. Yeah. But that monster surfaces again and again. And I found it interesting to draw lines between Jungian psychology, like the shadow, and the dog, especially when it was like nighttime. You know, the dog was at night, it was like a night creature. He was going there as a boy in the night. Yeah. He came across this thing in the darkness that he overcame.
And it's interesting that he doesn't go into that mode there. Do you know what I mean? That doesn't like he doesn't go into that crazed animal mode when he's killing the dog.
Maybe he does,
but it's not mentioned in the story that he does. Like I'm just thinking, there's a myth about slaying the dragon where the hero drinks the dragon's blood. That like in some sense you integrate the dragon. Like the dragon becomes a part of you.
Oh, but the dog definitely became a part.
But that's what I mean is that like the idea of him not going into animal mode in killing the dog is because that animal mode comes from killing the dog. Yeah. Because he becomes the dog. And that animal edge of him, that's where that comes from. Which I like just throwing that around that like he has drank the blood of the dragon. He has integrated that wild dog. Because that dog is a symbol of what he becomes. He becomes the man like in that position. Later in his life, when he goes into that mode, he's the man that can kill 100 men. You know what I mean? He's that wild animal that you do not mess with. And that's him switching, like, that dog is in a sense his shadow or his mirror self, his animal mirror. That, like, the dog that he slays is himself. If that makes any sense.
It does and it doesn't, because thinking in terms of the story there, right, it's like, things like aggression, these battle frenzies, these were prized because I suppose back then they probably got you into such a state where you just were able to do
there's like berserkers
things. It must have taken incredible courage to run at someone who has a sword, you know, and like even if you have a sword, like, you know, like you can get fucking, all it takes is one fucking point and you're fucking done, you know. And like to live back then and to just like to have that bravery. That it's almost like he didn't integrate the shadow at all, you know. It's almost like, or else he did, but the way that he uses it as opposed to the way that we use it. Like I would think of my integration of the shadow as a very different thing. Like if I thought of myself losing, like going into a battle frenzy, I would think of that was me not integrating my shadow.
I think.
But I think maybe that would have been a healthy integration of the shadow in the time he lived in.
Yeah, like, it's not integrating the shadow in the sense of like, okay, I've tamed that, it's now a conscious element of me, but it's more like it's become a part of him, rather than like integrating the shadow in the sense of, oh, you've nullified the unconscious aspect there, but in the sense of that is now a part of who Cúchulainn is. Like, he's now the kid plus, and he was already heroic in the sense he could beat 150 kids at fucking hurling.
Talented anyway, yeah.
But like that battle frenzy seems that seems like very connectable with that dog, because that's what that dog is a frenzy where it's like you better make sure there's no one else coming tonight, because that dog can kill 100 men. Like, that dog isn't messing around. And Cúchulainn becomes Culainn's hound. He becomes, like, his name is literally that he becomes that hound. He is now the Hound of Culainn, and that battle frenzy being connected in with that animalistic, that cool part of him. I would just see that. I'd like that. That makes so much sense to me. That like seems very on point.
Yes, it's such a different mind frame, isn't it? Like, the people that lived then, if one of them was sat down next to us now, we'd probably be like, what the fuck are you?
But see, the thing is that, like, we're not talking about historical people here. These people have become mythologized. These aren't like, Cúchulainn isn't human anymore. Like, whatever human there was has gathered so much gravity as a mythic figure that he's no longer a human. Like, if the Cúchulainn from the story was sitting right here, right now, it would just be, he wouldn't be human. This wouldn't make sense, because he's a hero. He's living on a different plane of existence. He probably, yeah. Like, I don't see this character as being historical at all. Like, whatever germ of history was there in the telling and retelling of stories, and the adding of mythic, if there ever was a Cúchulainn in the first place, then, which, no, I'd say there was a historical character, but they just generate like stories come in gravity and then embellishments that this isn't a historical human at all. For you?
I like to think that there's probably a little bit more history than you would like to believe, or that you think that there is. Yeah. But obviously, I mean, God knows. You know what I mean? It's been a long time since there was ever a fella called Cúchulainn walking around the place.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it would have lasted such a long time if there wasn't something exceptional to begin with. Like, yeah, you can have a snowball effect over time, but you have to start with a snowball. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't just start from a snowflake.
Yeah, but Arthur is a good example. Then let's take King Arthur.
Never get a story like that about a snowflake.
Like, King Arthur is, well, you'll have to wait a few hundred years before you'll know that. The mythologizing process takes a while. Yeah. But like, take King Arthur. That's someone who would have been much closer to historical record, and obviously that was just a plain old king. Like it's not. I don't think the original thing has to be that exceptional. It just needs to be exceptional enough in its time, and then the myths that are around at that time can converge on that one person.
What do you mean, Arthur? Obviously, Arthur was just a plain old king.
Well, I mean, Arthur, there's legendary stories attached to him, and he pulled a sword from the stone, and there's Excalibur, and does all these noble deeds that he did. But, and the Holy Grail, it's like, it's obviously myth. You know what I mean? Like, you don't really look on that as history. As like, oh, there was this, like, there was obviously a dude, Arthur, and then people thought highly enough of him in his time that, like, he started to become mythologized in his memory. So, like, say someone...
Yeah, so that point alone says to me, obviously, he just wasn't like any other king. Like, he was obviously an exceptional king among kings, even. Because you don't know any other stories about any other kings from England. But you know about Arthur.
Well,
and he lived at an exceptional time in history as well. Like, that was very... You know, when he lived, it was just like, wasn't it, the Romans had just left, and the Saxons were kind of making an attack, and wasn't he in the kind of like ruling the people in the ruins of what the Romans had left, and facing another enemy then after that. So it was like, I mean, it was like a very hard time, I imagine, in their history, and it was kind of almost like the people of England was rediscovering their Celtic identity. And Arthur was almost like at the head of that. He was like the people rediscovering, you know, after the Romans had left. It must have felt like civilization had left.
Yeah, so I think I think to that extent I do agree with you. Just exceptional in the sense of being like, he's there at an exceptional time, and he was probably a good leader, And I think with Cúchulainn, he was probably a pretty good hurler and a pretty good fighter. But I don't think he was beating 150. You know what I mean? That's like Chinese whispers. Like, yeah, he could beat 150 people at hurling. He beat this dog that could kill 100 people. Like, it's got the ring of a few lads in a pub embellishing a story.
Well, the dog beating 100 people is probably a bit of an embellishment itself, James.
That's what I mean. Like, that's another.
So he could have killed the dog.
What?
He could have killed the dog.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
He probably killed the dog.
The whole thing. Well, actually, there's some. If you dig into it, some scholars think that story was just added in. Like, you had the name Cúchulainn and they did a false etymology, and this whole story is just developed out of dissecting the name and playing around with Culainn and Cú means hound, so I wonder where that came from. Like, some scholars just think that this name and this whole story consequently just comes from a false attempted etymology of a name, because that's how the mythologizing process can go, because we could just play around with someone's name, like
Rihanna, Anna, high Anna, or Kingly Anna.
She's the rebirth of Anna. And who was Anna? Sure wasn't Anna. Blah de blah de blah. You know what I mean? Like, and if the story you make up about that false etymology is compelling enough, if it's sticky enough, then people will want to spread it. You go, that's a good enough story that I want it to be true, and that's how, because when you want a story to be true, that's when you're onto something.
There's a little bit of an ignorance I like to leave in myself when it comes to our own
because
mythology.
You want it to be true. Because
no, it's not even. No. It's not even that I want it to be true, right? It's not even that I want it to be true, because I'm sure most of it isn't, but I'm sure some of it is, right? Which I don't know, and there's a bit of utility in ignorance when it comes to this, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to have psychological,
if you want to get the full whack out of that, you have to just close the eyes a little bit and leave a little leap of faith to be made in your mind,
I think you should seriously re-question this podcast then. Because we're dissecting it. We're taking it apart and asking what's reality.
Oh yeah, but I'm bending my mind so it doesn't snap.
Oh God.
My witness here.
That's funny. I think that's probably a good place, unless you have a good closing remark.
Yeah, no, I think we've kind of covered everything that I had written down anyway.
Yeah. And so we close your eyes a little bit.
Close
your eyes on that myth a little
bit. And imagine Cúchulainn slamming that silver ball down that wild hound's throat.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit dirty. We can say it like that. On that note.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
True myth.
Damn it, I fucked it up.
That's not going to sound good because it's too close to.
It'll be grand. One of them will work.
One of them, you'll make something out of it, won't you?
It'll be good, Jez. Don't worry about it.
Because you don't want it to go past 5.
Don't go so close.
We should have said
Stand there.
goodbye, freak bitches.
Right, ready? You don't need to shout it. Stop.
I didn't
And
know you could do that.
go.
Good.
I just want one clean recording.
That was piercing, that was. I don't think that's good for the mic. It shatters glasses and everything. Ready? I was yeah. My neighbours will be like, what the fuck is wrong with him? Ask it again. Let's not make eye contact. So I don't know when you're staring into your eyes. You know when you touch it.
True myth.